Hi, my name is Brendan O'Hare. I've been a carpenter for 30 plus years. Today I want to give you a demonstration on how to replace an internal door using the procedures I've used for years. If you follow these steps, I guarantee you, no matter how good or bad your door frame is, you will end up with a perfectly hung door. So let's go. Step 1. Before you go to purchase your new door, you're going to need to know the height, the width and the thickness of the old door. Six foot 6, 2 foot 6, and very importantly, the thickness is 1.75 inches. And that is very important because doors come in a variety of thicknesses, anything from 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, and 1.75 inches. Step 2, we're going to take the old door off. When I take the old door off, if I'm going to reuse the furniture on it, I'll strip all the furniture off. But when you take the door off, you discard it. We will not be using the door for any measurements, sitting it on top of the new door, anything like that. It'll be discarded. So here we go, taking the old door off. I like to put a wedge under the door just to stop it falling off when I actually release all the screws from the hinges. You always start, when you're taking an old door off, you always start at the bottom and then move to the top, taking the hinges and the screws out of the top hinge last, because you don't want to be down there taking the last screw out and the door falls over on top of you. So here we go. Okay, that's the old door off. I'm now going to take the hinges off it and reuse the lock on it also, because they're all in good nick. So you have your new door home from the door store or the hardware shop. I always find that one face is usually nicer than the other, and I like to keep the best face into the room. Before I start hanging the door, I like to take the leading edge off the door. Now the leading edge is very important, and I'm now going to demonstrate what a leading edge is and why it is so important on the door. Okay, so here we have a mock-up of a stud wall, this being your stud, this representing the plasterboard either side, your architrave, your door frame, a door liner, more architrave, the door on the other side of the door frame. Now this door is perfectly square. This is not the right way to have a door. A door should always, as I said, have a leading edge. And the reason you need a leading edge is as you go to open the door, you will see this corner is now colliding with the door frame. So if it had a leading edge, like so, it would clear the door frame no problem. Also on the hinge side, you need a leading edge because here you have a tiny little gap. Now if you end up with a little extra paint on the door frame or on the door, the paint will end up catching between the door and the door frame and the door will not close properly. So therefore you need again a leading edge here. Once you have those two leading edges, the hinge will always sit slightly open, so even if the screws are sticking out of the hinge slightly, it will still allow the door to close properly. Now we're going to show putting a leading edge on the door. As I said earlier, I've chosen the best face of the door for inside. I'm now going to take the leading edge off the door. And to do this, I like to use Trend's TR39 router bit. As you can see, it has an angle on it, which is the perfect angle for taking the leading edge off a door. So, here we go. Safety first. See how easy that is? No back breaking, hard planing, just simply walk around the door. I've already taken the leading edge off both sides and the head of the door. At this point in time, some people would take a measurement from the head of the door to the floor and from the head of the door to the floor and transfer those marks onto their door and cut their door to fit into the frame. That's not good procedure, because that is not accounting for the fact that in some old buildings the floor can collapse, pulling the head of the frame down with it. This measurement and this measurement are still the same, but you are not accounting for the angle you now have on the head. And if you were to cut your door to these sizes, your door would be short by whatever degree the head of the door is dropped. I'm now going to demonstrate the proper procedure for fitting the door to the frame. We're now ready to fit the door into the frame. And to do this, I use a tool called the Easyscribe. It's a fantastic little tool. It's all fully adjustable with one hand. It has a blade that slips in and out. The blade will slip between the door and the frame, and the pencil point will give a parallel mark to the frame, giving you the right mark around the door where you need to cut the door down for the perfect fit to the frame. As you can see, the door has fitted into the frame. That was really to be expected. I put the door frame in. When you're replacing a door in a house though, that may not always be possible. Sometimes extra thick tiles have been put on the floor, or maybe the top of the door has dropped. In that case, you should at least put the top of the door into the frame. Take your Easyscribe and copy the shape of the frame onto the top of the door. This is giving you a reference line to work to. You take your door away, you reduce it down to that line. You then can take a measurement from the top of the frame here to the floor and from the frame here to the floor. Mark those, transfer those measurements onto your door and cut your door to height to fit in. Then you can put your door into the frame for the important part of copying the shape of the frame onto the door. And this is the important thing, because frames are rarely perfectly straight down the style. This is where you want the good margin. A door frame usually is waving in and out, and this is where you need your Easyscribe to run down the door frame and copy the shape of that frame onto the door to give you perfect margins. We're now going to mark the rest of the margins around the door using the Easyscribe. And that's it, as simple as that. That's all your marks around the door. You're ready to fit. So, at this point we have the door all marked. We now have to reduce it down to its lines. Traditionally, carpenters would sit a door on its edge and either use a hand plane going along the door. Slow, a little bit faster is using an electric plane, but still a back-breaking job, because when you sit the plane on the door you can't see the lines underneath, so you end up bending in underneath to see where the plane is actually cutting. I prefer to use the router. Using the router is a 3-stage procedure. You run around only taking 1/4 of an inch off. You only reduce it down close to the line, but you don't actually try and take it right to the line. You then plunge the router all the way down. I'll just show you. You plunge the router all the way down. It has a bearing guide. The bearing then runs along, takes the rest of the wood off the door. You then set the rider to one side. Remember, the door has a leading edge on it, so you go along with your hand plane and you reduce it perfectly down to the line. Then you lift your rider for the final stage, run around it one more time, and that gives a perfect finish to the door. Okay, this is going to be noisy. I'm just going to take the first cut here. Now, as you can see, I've only taken a little bit off the door, and I'm about to plunge the rider and take the rest of the waste off the door. So, I plunge it all the way down, and the little bearing guide runs around the door now, and removes the rest of the waste off. Okay, I've just done the second pass with the rider. I've taken all the waste off the door. I'm now going to use a hand plane to take the remaining waste off the door down to the line. Okay, that's it all reduced down to the line, so I'm going to do one more pass with the rider, and that's us ready to hang the door. Okay, that's the door ready now for hanging. We now have the door wedged into the frame. We have it propped up to give us the perfect margin along the head of the door. We're now going to mark the recess for the hinges on the door, or the position of the hinges on the door. Set it in, we put a tiny mark top and bottom. You only want to put a tiny mark because if you draw a big line across the door, you're going to have to sand that off later on before you varnish the door. And again, top and bottom. Top and bottom. And that's the position of the hinges all marked on the door. We're now ready to chop out the hinges, and I'm going to show you how we mark the hinge onto the door. We're now ready to sink the hinges into the door. Remember, the hinge has already been chopped out on the door frame. We have to sink the hinge into the door this way and also this way. And this gap is critically important because this gap has to match the gap already set on the hinge here, so that when the door closes you have a little gap here. And that's important because that has to allow for the door to freely close and allow for any paint or varnish that's going to go on the door liner. And the tool for doing that is the Easyscribe, because the Easyscribe can be set up against the door liner, and you take a reference then as to how deep it is. You then extend the blade on the Easyscribe, and the thickness of the blade will give you that perfect clearance. And as you can see, that mark would be perfect because it gives you the perfect clearance. I'm now going to mark out the door and we'll chop out all the hinges. We've already marked the positions for all the hinges on the door. We're now going to mark the hinge on the door itself. I like to use a sharp pencil for this. Some carpenters will use a marking knife like a Stanley knife, but the reason I don't like to use that is one slip with that and you have a big scratch in your brand new oak door. Plus I've never cut myself with a pencil. Now we've got the mark on we've got the hinge position marked here. We now have to mark the depth, and you remember we set the Easyscribe for that depth, so we just simply mark this. And now we need to mark the depth for the hinges, and you simply take the Easyscribe, wind it down to the depth of the hinge, extend the blade a little, right, that's all the hinges marked out. Now we're ready to chop out the hinges. I like to just use, on a single door, I just chop it out with a chisel. If I had a whole house full of doors to do, I would maybe make, out of a piece of plywood, cut these hinge positions out and use a small router to router out the hinges. And if you're a professional, you'll probably get yourself one of these. Trends hinge jig. Absolutely fantastic piece of kit. But since it's just one door we're doing now, I'm just going to chop it out with a chisel. Okay, we're now going to chop out all the hinges, just using the old chisel. Okay, I've just chopped out all the hinges on the door, screwed them on, and we're now going to lift the door in and screw it into the frame and see how it fits. Come on, buddy. Again, you want to always start screwing the door on at the top hinge, just to ensure it doesn't fall over on you. Alright, that should be enough screws just to test it. And there you go. Absolutely perfect margins, top and bottom, both sides. Job done.